don't know. Let's talk about guitar players. Since we're on the subject, we just mentioned Slash. Who are the most important guitar players of all time? You got Jeff Beck. You got Eric Clapton, um, George Harrison. From the Beatles. I mean, who are the most important guitar players of all time? Well, for hard rock and heavy metal, um, there's probably three that are the most important, and then everybody behind these three are addition two, which when you talk about a certain style of music, you have the founding members, and then you have the people that start innovating it. And so when you talk about probably the three most important guitar players, and I'm sure I'm going to get crap for this, but the three most important guitar players for the land of heavy metal and hard rock would be one, Tony Iommi. I mean, if Tony Iommi's not the godfather, not the grandfather of metal music, then I don't know who is. Tony's the one that came out with power chords, basically. I mean, he didn't invent power chords, don't get me wrong, but he's the one that came out with the severe crunch and the like, dude. And also Tony's is like a riff meister. Tony would come out with just those riffs, the signature Sabbath riffs, and there's 100,000 of them that he came out with, but he's definitely the godfather of heavy metal music. And if you don't think he is, then go hang out with Axl, and you guys can be in Guns N' Roses together. Jimmy Page. You don't have to. Jimmy Page is one of the greatest studio guitar players of all time. And when you listen to Led Zeppelin live versus studio, there's a huge difference. The things he did in the studio were unrivaled. But when you listen to the jamming part in Stairway, his solo and then the jamming part, that says it all. That says it all. And then the third one is probably Richie Blackmore. I mean, Blackmore, he threw in the classical feel. You hear him play some of those things on the Deep Purple albums, and then also on the Rainbow stuff. I mean, Richie kind of took what Page and Iommi were doing. He kind of took it that one step further, and you could definitely hear his influence, because he'd play bluesy stuff, but he'd play classical stuff too, and you would just go, wow. You listen to songs like Gates of Babylon, and you just go, whoa, what was he doing? And of course you just listen to like the cool Deep Purple stuff, and phenomenal. Those are the three, that probably mattered the most. And then you have everybody that's addition two, and that's probably, maybe where Slash would fall into, in addition to. I'll be back. The Blair Witch Project. They're coming. I don't know. They're coming. Talk about hard rock guitar players. We're gonna start off with Eddie Van Halen, and here's the deal with Eddie. The first four Van Halen albums, Van Halen 1, 2, Women and Children First, and Fair Warning, are probably four of the most original rock albums of all time. And he was doing crazy stuff on those albums. He was playing around with his technique. He was playing around with his equipment. He was coming out with truly original music. And then, you get into Diver Down in 1984, and then the Hagar stuff, and you really have to ask yourself a question. It's like, what have you done for me lately, Eddie? You know, when was the last time Eddie Van Halen came out with something that was truly amazing? I mean, he could sit around and play Eruption until the cows come home, and it's cool that he came out with Eruption, but pretty much anybody can play Eruption. I think I could play Eruption. Um, I'm not gonna, because he'll sue me. No, I don't think he. He might. Who knows? Especially after the comments I made about his big fat son. Sorry. The two things that Eddie Van Halen did for rock and roll, one is he showed us, to not just sit around and be contrite with your music, to actually push the boundaries. And Van Halen did that. They pushed the boundaries. Van Halen would come out with like the crunchiest, hardest riff. You listen to like atomic punk, and then at the same time they would come out with like, ba ba da shooby doo wah ba boom boom, ba ba da shooby doo wah ba boom boom. They would be singing barbershop, for Christ's sakes, or could this be magic? Could this be magic, or could this be love? Could this turn tragic? That magic of didn't die. And I see lonely ships upon the harbor. Better save the women and children first. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you're not a Van Halen fan. So I'm just throwing that out there. The other thing that Eddie did is he made all the guitar players in the world look at themselves and start pushing the envelope as well. There are guys that were out there at the same time in the music scene when Eddie was playing the clubs down in Hollywood back in the mid 70s that saw him live. Eddie was so good. Like when he would do his solo, or he started doing the finger tapping and stuff, and Dave told him, like, turn around backwards so they can't see what you're doing, because we don't want other people copying you. And of course, eventually everybody copied him, and I think there were so many guitar players that incorporated that into their own style at that time. So if you want to talk about most influential, you got to mention Eddie Van Halen. He was revolutionary. He blew the world away, and I wish he would have put out a bit more effort after he became rich and huge and famous, and continue pushing the envelope, because I really think he got lazy. Sorry, Eddie, but I think he got lazy. You did the Pepsi Clear commercial with Sammy Hagar. And then, of course, that brings us to Randy Rhoads. And I'm not going to say Randy was a student of Eddie Van Halen, but, they did play on the Sunset Strip together. Same era. There was shows that Quiet Riot did with Van Halen. So, obviously Randy was familiar with Eddie. He did the finger tapping stuff. He'd be like, the only thing is Randy kind of took it kind of to the next extreme, where Eddie would just be sitting there hitting the B, Randy would be like, but obviously, all guitar players, they had seen Eddie play, and at that time from '78 when the first Van Halen album came out up into the '80s and stuff. Obviously Eddie was a huge influence on every guitar player, and he was very flashy, and that was one of the things that Randy talked about. I remember reading an interview with Randy, or actually listening to a taped interview with Randy, where he talked about doing his guitar solo when he was with Ozzy. He would do the finger stuff, and he would do the and to Randy that was kind of a ripoff. It was kind of a cheat to him, because he thought they did it for the kids, because the kids liked they liked the sound of it, and it looked like it was super fast and super cool, but at the same time it was pure flash, and Randy was more into his composition than he was just being a flashy player. Anybody could with some practice and stuff could be a flashy player, and I don't know that he felt that Eddie was flashy, but Eddie was definitely flashy if you listen to the early Van Halen albums. But his flash was what made him awesome. But the cool thing about Randy was is because all those people like Eddie Van Halen and stuff, they were all running around Hollywood at the time in the old Sunset Strip days, and so it was kind of cool to to get that vibe of competition out there between Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. Um, I was watching a YouTube interview. It wasn't an interview from YouTube, but it was on YouTube with Nikki Sixx, where he said that him and Randy knew the same girl, and Randy, when Diary came out, he brought it to Nikki, and they listened to it together, and Nikki was blown away by it, and it seemed odd to me to think back that because Nicky was in London before he was in Motley Crue, so they were playing the Starwood and the Whiskey and all that, so they were all compatriots of the strip. But it seemed cool to think about Motley Crue, and then you think about Randy Rhoads, because to me, you know, growing up as a kid and being a huge Randy fan, and then Randy passing away in '82. I always view everything as like up to Randy, and then after March 19th, 1982, everything beyond. So you got, it's like the birth of Christ. You got BC and AD. So you got BR and AR before Randy and after Randy. So, but the cool thing about Randy is obviously he came out with these iconic songs. You hear Crazy Train and Flying High Again, and even the depth of like Revelation, Mother Earth, or You Can't Kill Rock and Roll, and Diary of a Madman, when you listen to that deep down structure that Randy was laying down, and you say to yourself, because Randy was a guitar teacher, so he was very strict. In fact, it's funny that you should mention that. I got this from his mother, and that's cool. If you want to call Randy, his phone number's right there. I don't know if he's home though, but that's pretty cool, right? Showing off some of my memorabilia. But Randy was a guitar teacher. He taught at Musonia, his mom's school, for years and years, and so did George Lynch from Dokken. And you could tell like Randy was very strict on himself about his sound and his technique and what he put out, and you could hear it building. You could hear it from Blizzard into Diary, and of course Randy never was afforded the opportunity to continue to refine his sound and adding that classical influence and going beyond Diary of a Madman, obviously because of his passing, but you could tell he was building up to something even greater. So definitely Randy, and there's a lot of guitar players out there to this day that are hugely influenced by Randy's technique and the way Randy approached songwriting. So, Randy Rhoads. The next one I want to talk about is Alex Lifeson, and of course Alex from Rush. The evolution of Alex, starting with the first Rush album, where it was hard, it was heavy, it was like listening to Zeppelin jamming. You could tell there was a lot of Zeppelin influence going on. But to hear those erratic solos and just the intensity that he was playing with, you listen to that first Rush album and you just listen to Working Man and listen to the solo on that. It's just, Alex was out to conquer the world, man. You could tell, like, it wasn't so much he was playing with a chip on his shoulder, because at that time, I mean, who was he competing with? They had some of the they had the established bands that were around at the time, but like these guys really quickly did away with the competition as far as composition and musical talent were concerned. And then so quickly Alex just started building upon everything. You listen to that first album, and then you go into Fly By Night, and you start hearing the acoustic stuff that they're doing, and then they did By Tour, and and they had some misses, Rivendell, Rivendell. Woo! You need to take a Xanax so if you listen to that song, you'll be like, ugh. But his riff technique. You listen to like Anthem and Beneath, Between, Behind, and he's such a great riff guy that he's just throwing it out there. And then quickly just still evolving as you moved into Caress of Steel, which a lot of people think was a misfire, but you can't deny musically on there. Yeah, it was a misfire because it was such a hodgepodge album. You had Bastille Day and Lakeside Park, which were straight ahead rockers. You had I Think I'm Going Bald, which made like not a lot of sense. And then all of a sudden you moved into like Necromancer and the Fountain of Lament, where you had all those little different parts of the song suites um, and it was confusing to fans, and I think that's why it was a misfire. But musically, Alex was just expounding upon his own style, and then of course they went into 2112, where they started playing with some smaller, I don't want to say smaller, but shorter songs. You got Something for Nothing and A Passage to Bangkok, and Twilight Zone. I think they were smoking a lot of hash. I mean, they probably would deny that, but have you ever put on the headphones and listened to Twilight Zone, where Geddy sings in one side and he whispers in the other? Whoa. And then, of course, it just kept evolving, and you get up into like hemispheres where they do La Via Strangiato and then moving pictures, and then as they progressed and they got up into moving pictures, which was the pinnacle. And then in the 80s they just started working a little bit different song structures, and Alex wasn't really throwing out the solos like he was, and so there was a little bit of a lull. And then towards the end of the 80s he actually came back and started throwing down some hard solos again. So Alex Lifeson, I almost called him Alex Van Halen for some strange reason. Alex Lifeson, definitely one of the one of the true great pioneers of hard rock, and definitely an influence, on anybody. And he basically knows like every chord in the entire like known universe. It reminds me a lot of Andy Summers when it comes down to that. We're very chord structured. Joe Satriani. And Joe Satriani's he's later 80s. I remember like Surfing with the Alien had come out, and we were at the NAMM show in like 88, and I remember that was a big deal. And Ibanez put on a show with all their, guys that were on their guitars. And, God, for some reason, like, I just had a brain fart. Whoa. Anyways, I think Guitar World magazine put on a show, and it was like Kristen Pelletieri and Frank Gambale, Scott Henderson opened the show, and then they had Joe, and Joe Satriani came out, and he had Stu Ham on bass, and they played like they were playing songs off Surfing with the Alien because it just come out, and it was a huge deal because it was amazing. If you never listened to Surfing with the Alien and don't understand how refined and just absolutely out and out rocking that album is, then I'm sorry, you'll never understand. But here's a guy that was Steve Vai's guitar teacher, Kirk Hammett from Metallica. Yeah, that's his guitar teacher. He was playing stuff that just it wasn't like it wasn't something that you listened to and you were like so blown away because it was technically proficient. It was more, wow, this guy can put down a groove. Like if you listen to just any of the Ice Nine and Satch Boogie and Surfing with the Alien and Always with me, always with you, and um, just the groove that this guy could come up with. And it was all instrumental, and he had Not of This Earth before that, and afterwards he had just just amazing stuff. And of course, he one of the founding members of G3 with Eric Johnson and Steve Vai, and of course, there's been a lot of incarnations of that particular band. They have Ingve in there, and they've had a bunch of different other guitar players. Different other guitar players. That made sense. But Joe Satriani, I remember they had this guitar show, and they were playing, and we were sitting. It was at the Disneyland Hotel, so the stage was like a foot high, and we were sitting right in front of him. So we're talking to Joe as he's playing, and one of my buddies, like, Joe plugs his guitar in and makes this feedback noise, and my buddy Kevin, he's like, "Did you write that?" And he's like, "As a matter of fact, I did." And that was kind of cool. But then Stevie Vai came out at the end, and they played a couple songs together, and we got some great pictures of that show. And just to be able to watch Steve Vai and Joe Satriani playing on the same stage, and this is way before G3. It was phenomenal. And of course, Stu Ham came out, and he played Charlie the theme from Linus and Lucy from Charlie Brown on his bass, and that was phenomenal. So definitely Joe Satriani, just his influence as far as being a guitar teacher, and then on top of that, just the fact that he came out with some of these phenomenal instrumental albums, and such a rocker, dude. Just such a phenomenal rocker, and technically proficient, of course. I mean, if you ever heard him sit there and do his arpeggios, it's just like, oh my God, this guy's intensity. So definitely Joe Satriani. We can't go very far without mentioning Ace Frehley. Ace Frehley is one of those guitar players that probably influenced most of the '80s metal bands. If you ask any guitar player out there, I mean, everybody was a huge Ace Frehley fan. Everybody would try and emulate his solo from Kiss Alive 2, and what can you say about Ace? Ace was a rock star, man. Ace was one of the, like Jimmy Page and Tony Iommi and Blackmore. He was a rock star. He had makeup on, but he was a rock star. If you don't think Ace Frehley was one of the original rock stars, he was. Ace, if you watch Ace live, he was kind of sloppy, because most of the time he's wasted out of his mind. I think, some kudos should be given to Ace for being able to play in that state of mind, because, dude, that's hard. You can't roll out on stage just wasted, totally drunk out of your head, or stoned to the ninth level of pie, and play a whole show, and one, not walk into a flash pot and get incinerated, and two, be able to just remember the set list. It's pretty incredible. And not only that, he would do his guitar solo, and his guitar would catch on fire, while he was playing it, which was pretty cool. And then it would fly off of him and float up into the heavens. So, but one of the true testaments to the fact of how cool Ace was is the fact that when Kiss in '78 came out with their solo albums, each one came out with their solo albums. I think to this day, Ace Frehley's solo album is the top selling amongst those, because it was so good. He did everything from rock to kind of bluesy, kind of it had an attitude that was kind of Ace, And if you remember Ace, if you looked at the album covers, look at the cover of Destroyer and see the weird face Ace is making, and like his fingers are all bent backwards and like weird. I mean, it's a mystery, but somebody was trying to undermine Ace, so that needs to be investigated. Definitely. But definitely, man, he influenced a whole generation of guitar players from like Dimebag Darrell was a huge Ace Frehley fan. In fact, if you listen to the first couple of Pantera albums before they got Phil Anselmo, like when they were like a kind of a hair metal band from Texas. Um, there was a huge. It sounded like Ace Frehley was playing on those albums, so definitely a great influence, you know. And then Ace over the years, you know, he was in Frehley's Comet, and he's done some solo stuff. And I don't know if he can ever recapture the glory of the, you know, the old Kiss stuff, but you know, to listen to Ace sing "Shock Me" is still shocking to this day, you know. Shock me. But he wrote a lot of really good, you know, some of the earlier Kiss stuff, Cold Gin, that was written by Ace. You know, they just made Gene sing it because Ace didn't really want to sing back then. So, but yeah, Ace Frehley, like an American legend. Oh, Mama, take a look at your boy, he's a military man. Mama, take a look at your boy, he's crying. Mama, take a look at your boy, he's a soldier. Mama, take a look in his eyes, they're colder. Mama, take a look at your boy, he's a military man. Mama, take a look at your boy, he's dying. They have trained your boy to kill. And kill someday he will. They have trained your boy to die. And ask no questions why. One of the greatest guitar players of all time, and one that's probably not as well known as he should be in America, was Gary Moore. And literally, like, he was like a god in like Europe and Japan and stuff, but here in America, you know, we aficionados, we know who Gary Moore is, but the average Joe, I don't think they could name like too many Gary Moore songs. He came from Thin Lizzy. He was on the Black Rose album, which is probably one of their better albums and one of their most popular albums. Phenomenal guitar player. He could play anything. And then, you know, he broke away from Thin Lizzy, came out with like Corridors of Power and Victims of the Future and Dirty Fingers. And, you know, up on into the 80s, one of my favorite Gary Moore albums is Run for Cover, and it has Phil Lynott on it. And, you know, like Military Man, which we got a little taste of there. There's some great songs on there. And even on into like Wild Frontiers, which I know Bob Daisley was talking about because Bob played on that album. He was talking about it in his book, and just what fun they had making that out, those albums really in that album, and really on that album, Over the Hills and Far Away. I don't know if you like Irish music, but there's you know the solo part in Over the Hills and Far Away is like. Listen to it. If you haven't listened to Gary Moore, you need to go out and find Gary Moore. Now, Gary, towards the end of his life, he did switch over to the blues and kind of dedicated all his playing to the blues. But and there's some great albums even after that. Didn't really like the bluesy stuff as much as the early stuff. But talk about a player that should have been the hugest guitar player of all time. And, of course, he passed away a couple years ago while he was vacationing. They found him. He had a heart attack while he was sleeping, I think. And what a sad day that was, because Gary just personified, like, the guy was the ultimate guitar player. You listen to his jams. You listen to Hiroshima and just Murder in the Skies and stuff like that. Just phenomenal. Phenomenal. I'm going to say that over and over because Gary was phenomenal. I know he did a lot of things over the years. Like I have a live show he did with Mick Jagger called We Want More Jagger. He played some songs with Ozzy. You know, he used to guest on, you know, here and there. I think he was an in and out member of Thin Lizzy for a long time, even after Phil passed away. Um, he would pop in and out of Thin Lizzy just to keep that music going. So, uh, like I said, go out and find some Gary Moore, um, and listen to it. And if you aren't familiar with Gary's work, you'll be pleasantly surprised. So, definitely. I know another band that I haven't talked about, and I haven't talked about them the first two shows. Didn't talk about them on the live show, although they did have a live bootleg album, and that's what it was called, live bootleg, back in the 80s. I think it was early 80s. Or it might have been the 70s. It's hard to tell. Is a band called Aerosmith. Ever heard of them? And in that band, you have Brad Whitford and you have Mr. Joe Perry. And Joe Perry is one of those guitar players that has influenced, just like Ace Frehley. You had Ace Frehley, and on the other side of the coin, you had Joe Perry. Joe Perry influenced a batch of guitar players, including Slash. So. We talked about Slash earlier, and Joe Perry, huge influence on Slash. So, Joe Perry, I didn't mention Aerosmith in my live show because they didn't really have a real live album, not till later on, and they do have a couple of cool live albums. But as far as like their best of albums, kind of like with Alice, I love a lot of Aerosmith, but there's not one particular album from Aerosmith that I go, ooh, yeah. I mean, Toys in the Attic comes very close. Very close. In fact, I probably should have mentioned that album because it was a great album. Rocks, Jeez. Even Lightning Strikes. That's not an album. It was called Rock in the Hard Place, but Lightning Strikes, that song, that's one of my favorites. And and we won't even talk about that because I think Rick Dufay was in the band along with Jimmy Crespo? Crespo? Whatever the fuck his name was. Who gives a shit? It wasn't Joe Perry. Joe Perry, though, here's a guy that's in his 60s, and he's just like, he always plays and he's chiseled. This guy's like super healthy, and this is a guy that used to hang out with Steve Tyler, and they used to be called the Toxic Twins. And here's a guy that's like Keith Richards, man. He should be dead, but this guy's in phenomenal. He's in better shape than I am, and I'm like, 20 years younger than he is. Probably a little bit more than 20 years, hopefully. But anyways, this guy, he influenced, like I said, like a whole batch of guitar players. You listen to the early Aerosmith, very bluesy, very River Delta kind of, Robert Johnson-y kind of stuff. But, he was also just a rocker, dude. And even his solo projects, great stuff, man. Great stuff. That guy's a phenomenal player. He's a great player. And he's just, you watch him and he plays with kind of an attitude. And, He's kind of like Slash without the big giant hair, He's what Slash wants to be. So, Joe Perry, check him out.